Headlights pierced the darkness of the affluent Chevy Chase cul-de-sac, casting long, menacing shadows against the manicured lawns. Naomi Carmichael, a senior attorney for the Department of Justice, pulled her Audi into her own garage, exhausted but safe. Or so she thought. Seconds later, a police cruiser blocked her driveway, trapping her inside. What Officer Brian Dugan didn't realize as he unholstered his weapon and barked orders at the homeowner was that he wasn't just violating her rights, he was starring in a live-streamed federal nightmare. Exhaustion sat heavy on Naomi Carmichael's shoulders, a physical weight born from 14 hours of navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth of the United States Department of Justice. As the director of the Civil Rights Division's Special Litigation Section, her days were consumed by constitutional crises, systemic police misconduct, and the drafting of federal consent decrees. Tonight was no different. Her leather briefcase, resting on the passenger seat of her charcoal Audi e-tron, was stuffed with thousands of pages of deeply troubling data regarding a corrupt narcotics unit in a major Midwestern city. She had spent the entire evening in a windowless conference room with Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark, dissecting Fourth Amendment violations until her eyes burned. Leaving the imposing brutalist architecture of the Robert F. Kennedy Department of Justice building behind, Naomi merged onto Rock Creek Parkway, letting the smooth, silent hum of her electric vehicle soothe her frayed nerves. It was past 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. The sprawling metropolis of Washington, D.C. was a ghost town, the monuments glowing softly in the rearview mirror as she navigated toward the Maryland border. She was 42 years old, a Yale law graduate, a former federal prosecutor, and a black woman who had spent her entire adult life fighting for the very scales of justice she wore as a lapel pin. But in the quiet solitude of her car, stripped of her courtroom presence and her federal credentials, she knew the stark reality of the world she lived in. Crossing the district line into the wealthy, tree-lined enclave of Chevy Chase, Maryland, the atmosphere shifted. Here, the streetlights were dimmer, designed to preserve the aesthetic of the multi-million-dollar colonial homes that sat set back from the winding roads. Naomi had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years with her husband, David, a high-level cybersecurity architect for the Department of Defense. They had earned their slice of the American dream through relentless hard work. Yet, as she turned onto Connecticut Avenue, a primal instinct, honed by decades of lived experience, made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She glanced at her rearview mirror. 2 distinct, glaring headlights had materialized out of the gloom. They belonged to a Montgomery County Police Department Ford Explorer. Naomi's pulse ticked up a fraction of a beat, though her hands remained relaxed at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. She checked her digital speedometer, 33 miles per hour in a 35 zone, both hands on the wheel, seatbelt securely fastened, registration updated just last month, tail lights fully operational. She had checked them herself on Sunday. There was absolutely no legal justification for a traffic stop. Still, the cruiser lingered. It didn't pass her when the lane opened up. It matched her speed, hovering perfectly in her blind spot, executing a textbook rolling surveillance technique. Naomi's mind, a steel trap of legal precedent, immediately began calculating. Terry v. Ohio, Warren v. United States. She knew the case law inside and out. She knew that a police officer only needed a pretextual reason, a supposed drift over the yellow line, a license plate light that was allegedly too dim, to initiate a stop. She signaled with ample distance and turned onto Bradley Boulevard. The cruiser followed. She signaled again, taking the left onto Sycamore Drive, the quiet, exclusive street where her custom-built home resided. The cruiser followed, closing the gap until it was mere car lengths from her rear bumper. The psychological toll of the moment was suffocating. Naomi Carmichael was a woman who could subpoena a mayor, who could dismantle an entire police department's funding with a single, meticulously researched memorandum. Yet here in the dark, isolated bubble of her car, she was reduced to the same terrifying vulnerability that she fought to protect others from. The familiar, sickening knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach, the universal burden of being black in America, while a police cruiser shadowed your every move. Just get home, she told herself, her breathing controlled and even. You're 2 blocks away. You haven't broken a single law. You're on your own street. She hit the button on her sun visor. Half a block away, the heavy oak-paneled door of her 3-car garage began to ascend, spilling warm, golden light onto her wide, stamped concrete driveway. She signaled her turn, smoothly angling the Audi onto her property. She rolled forward, the tires crunching softly against the pavement, and parked neatly beside David's vacant spot. He was currently in London for a cybersecurity summit. Relief washed over her in a tidal wave. She had made it. She shifted the car into park and reached up to press the garage door button a second time, fully intending to close the heavy wooden barrier and lock the world away for the night. But before her finger could depress the plastic button, the world outside exploded in a violent, blinding kaleidoscope of flashing strobes. The piercing red and blue lights bounced off the walls of Naomi's garage, turning her meticulously organized sanctuary into a chaotic, strobing nightmare. The Montgomery County cruiser had not just followed her. It had aggressively accelerated, cutting across her driveway at a sharp angle to physically block the exit. The nose of the police vehicle breached the threshold of her property line, the high beams completely blinding her. Naomi froze, her hand suspended mid-air. For a fraction of a second, sheer disbelief paralyzed her. She was parked inside her own home. The engine of her car was off. The heavy thud of a heavy car door slamming shut echoed over the quiet hum of the crickets. Heavy boots crunched on her driveway, moving with aggressive, deliberate speed. "Put your hands where I can see them! Do it now!" The voice was a harsh, guttural bark, echoing loudly in the enclosed space of the garage. Naomi took a slow, steadying breath. Panic was the enemy of survival. She relied on the cold, calculating detachment that had made her a terror in the courtroom. She rolled down her window just a few inches, enough to communicate, not enough to allow someone to reach in. She kept both hands firmly planted on the top of the steering wheel, fully visible. Officer Brian Dugan stepped into the periphery of her vision. He was a thick-set man in his late 30s, his face flushed, his jaw set in a rigid line of absolute authority. His right hand was resting heavily on the grip of his unholstered service weapon. His posture was deeply aggressive, a physical manifestation of an adrenaline-fueled power trip. "Engine off! Keys on the dash! Now!" Dugan commanded, stepping closer to the driver's side door, his flashlight beam slicing through the narrow opening of the window and blinding Naomi. "Officer," Naomi said, her voice remarkably steady, devoid of any tremor. It was the voice she used when cross-examining hostile witnesses. "The vehicle is electric. The engine is already off. The keys are in my purse on the passenger seat. My hands are on the steering wheel. I didn't ask for lip, I asked for compliance," Dugan snapped, shining the light directly into her eyes. "Roll this window all the way down and step out of the vehicle." "I am parked inside my own garage, on my private property," Naomi stated calmly, squinting against the blinding glare. "Could you please inform me why I am being detained?" "You ran a stop sign at Bradley and Wisconsin," Dugan lied smoothly, without a second of hesitation. "And you failed to maintain your lane. Now whose house is this? What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The blatant microaggression hung in the air, toxic and heavy. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The implication was clear. A black woman in a $100,000 car pulling into a $3 million home at 1 in the morning didn't fit Officer Dugan's narrow, prejudiced worldview. In his eyes, she was a suspect, an anomaly, an interloper in a wealthy white enclave. "This is my home," Naomi said, her tone icy. "I reside at 412 Sycamore Drive, and I did not run a stop sign at Bradley and Wisconsin, nor did I fail to maintain my lane. Furthermore, a minor traffic infraction does not give you the legal authority to breach the curtilage of my property without a warrant." Dugan's face darkened, the muscles in his neck visibly tightening. The legal terminology, curtilage, warrant, detained, seemed to act as an accelerant to his rage. He despised citizens who thought they knew the law. He especially despised it when it came from someone who looked like Naomi, speaking to him with the authoritative tone of a superior. "Listen to me, girl," Dugan sneered, stepping aggressively close to the door panel, his hand tightening on his holster. "I don't give a damn what you think you know. You are going to step out of this vehicle right now, provide your license and registration, or I am going to rip you out of this car for failure to obey a lawful order and resisting arrest. Do we understand each other?" Naomi's mind raced. She knew that legally, Pennsylvania v. Mims allowed an officer to order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. But this was not a lawful traffic stop. He had followed her onto her private property without activating his lights prior to her parking. The jurisdiction was murky, the constitutional violations staggering. But she also knew the grim statistics her division compiled every year. She knew that asserting her rights in the dark, isolated from witnesses, could cost her her life. Comply physically, resist legally. It was the mantra she taught young civil rights activists. Now she had to live it. "I will step out of the vehicle," Naomi said, moving with exaggerated slowness. "I am not resisting. I am unlocking the door now." She popped the door handle. As the heavy door swung open, Dugan didn't give her the chance to step out under her own power. He lunged forward, grabbing her upper left arm with a brutal, crushing grip. "Hey!" Naomi gasped, the sudden physical violence shocking her despite her mental preparation. "Shut up and turn around," Dugan bellowed. He yanked her out of the driver's seat with enough force that she stumbled, her shoulder slamming hard against the exterior of her own car. Before she could regain her balance, Dugan shoved her face first toward the sleek, sloping hood of the Audi. "Spread your legs," he ordered, kicking her left ankle hard with his heavy boot, forcing her stance wide. "Officer, you are using excessive force," Naomi said, her cheek pressed against the cool metal of her car. Her voice was strained, but she refused to let him hear her panic. "I am fully compliant. You are committing battery." "I told you to shut your mouth." Dugan leaned his heavy body weight against her back, pinning her in place. He reached to his utility belt, the metallic clatter of steel handcuffs echoing loudly in the garage. "You're under arrest for failure to comply, eluding a police officer, and suspicion of driving under the influence." "Eluding?" Naomi practically scoffed, despite the pain shooting through her shoulder. "You never activated your lights until I was parked inside my home. There is no suspicion of DUI. You are fabricating charges to justify an illegal detainment." "Hands behind your back!" He wrenched her left arm backward, twisting her wrist at an unnatural, agonizing angle. The cold steel of the handcuff clamped down on her wrist, ratcheting tight enough to immediately cut off circulation. He grabbed her right arm, forcing it to meet the left, and secured the second cuff. She was a high-ranking official of the United States Department of Justice. She had the private cell phone number of the Attorney General in her contacts, and she was currently handcuffed to the hood of her car in her own garage, completely at the mercy of a man who viewed her very existence as a crime. The searing pain in Naomi's wrists was sharp, but the white-hot clarity in her mind was sharper. She stood awkwardly beside the hood of her Audi, her arms secured tightly behind her back, her posture rigidly upright despite Dugan's attempts to keep her off balance. Tires screeched on the asphalt outside. A second Montgomery County police cruiser careened to a halt on the street, its light bar adding a new layer of blinding, chaotic strobes to the scene. The cavalry had arrived. Officer Detha Fowler stepped out of the second unit, jogging up the driveway. He was younger than Dugan, barely 30, with a thin, nervous face and a uniform that looked slightly too large for him. He slowed his pace as he crossed the threshold of the garage, his eyes darting from the luxury vehicles to the high ceilings, and finally to the well-dressed black woman, handcuffed by his partner. "Everything good here, Brian?" Fowler asked, his voice lacking the aggressive conviction of his partner. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Got a runner, Detha?" Dugan panted slightly, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He sounded triumphant. "Blew a stop sign, refused to pull over, tried to duck into this garage to hide, refused lawful orders, combative, smelled alcohol." Every single word was a documented, malicious falsehood. Naomi locked eyes with Officer Fowler. "Officer," Naomi said, projecting her voice so it was clear, distinct, and commanding. "My name is Naomi Carmichael. I am the home owner of this property. I did not run a stop sign. Your partner did not initiate his lights or sirens until I was fully parked inside this garage. I have consumed 0 alcohol. I have been entirely compliant. He dragged me from my vehicle and assaulted me." Fowler shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking between Naomi and Dugan. The classic blue wall of silence was erecting itself right in front of her eyes. Fowler saw a distressed, handcuffed woman in an affluent setting, making entirely rational, legally sound claims. But he was looking at Dugan, his senior officer, waiting for the cue on reality. "Don't listen to a word she says. She's a liar and she's highly uncooperative," Dugan sneered. He turned to Naomi, a nasty smile playing on his lips. "Let's see what you're trying to hide in here." Without asking for consent, without stating probable cause, Dugan leaned into the driver's side of the Audi. "Officer Dugan, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," Naomi stated, her voice ringing out like a gavel strike. "You have no warrant. You have no probable cause. That vehicle contains sensitive, classified federal documents." Dugan laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed in the garage. "Classified federal documents? Right. Sure thing. What, are you a secret agent now? Let me guess, you're best friends with the president? I am the director of the Special Litigation Section for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice," Naomi said, her tone absolute 0. "And you are currently committing a felony violation of 18 U.S.C., Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law." Dugan paused for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering over her leather briefcase. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. But his ego, swollen by years of unchecked authority, quickly squashed it. He grabbed her purse and dumped its contents onto the passenger seat. Lipstick, a wallet, a set of keys, and her DOJ identification badge spilled out. He didn't even bother to look at the badge. Next, he grabbed her leather briefcase. "Fowler, keep an eye on her," Dugan barked, tearing the brass clasps of the briefcase open. "Brian, maybe we should just run her ID and—" Fowler started, his anxiety peaking as he looked at the high-end surroundings. "I said keep an eye on her," Dugan snapped. He began violently rummaging through the meticulously organized folders inside the briefcase. These were the highly confidential drafts of the Baltimore Police Department consent decree. Dugan was ripping through pages of sworn testimonies, confidential informant data, and federal tactical strategies. "You're a real piece of work, lady," Dugan muttered, pulling out a stack of papers and tossing them carelessly onto the dashboard. "Thinking you can come into a neighborhood like this Act like you own the place. Talk down to a sworn officer of the law. People like you think the rules don't apply. People like you. Naomi stood in the harsh glare of the police lights, the cold metal of the handcuffs cutting into her skin. But as she watched Officer Dugan illegally rifle through federal property, desecrating her work and her civil rights, a profound, chilling sense of calm washed over her. Dugan thought he was a god in this garage. He thought the darkness covered his sins. He thought it was his word, the word of a decorated white police officer against the word of a black woman. He thought he controlled the narrative. He was spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. Naomi didn't look at Dugan. She didn't look at the nervous Officer Fowler. Slowly, deliberately, she tilted her chin upward, her eyes fixing on the far, upper right corner of the garage ceiling. Nestled inconspicuously between the heavy wooden rafters. There, perfectly camouflaged in the shadows, was a small, sleek black dome. It was a commercial-grade, 4K resolution, Lorex pan-tilt zoom security camera. It wasn't just a camera, it was part of a state-of-the-art, hard-wired security grid that her husband, David, had custom installed. Because of the highly sensitive nature of both of their government clearances, David had bypassed standard Wi-Fi setups, which could easily be jammed by sophisticated burglars. The camera in the garage, along with 6 others around the property, was hardwired directly via Cat6 Ethernet cable to a secure server rack in their basement. More importantly, it featured a highly sensitive, noise-cancelling directional microphone. It didn't just record video, it recorded crystal-clear audio, and it wasn't recording to a local SD card that a corrupt cop could smash under his boot. It was live syncing via an encrypted, multi-layered VPN directly to a secure Amazon Web Services cloud server. Every lie Dugan had told about the stop sign, every aggressive bark, every racial microaggression, the distinct sound of her demanding to know why she was detained, the violent thud of her body being slammed against the car, the clear, unequivocal statement where she denied consent to search, Dugan mocking her federal credentials, Fowler's cowardly silence. The camera had captured it all. It was capturing it right now. High-definition video, pristine audio, time-stamped, and legally unassailable. Naomi stared directly into the tiny, unblinking glass lens of the camera. The pain in her shoulders evaporated, replaced by the lethal, calculating adrenaline of a trial lawyer who has just been handed the smoking gun by the defense's own star witness. "Keep digging, Officer Dugan," Naomi thought, a cold, predatory focus settling into her deep brown eyes as she watched him toss another confidential federal document onto the floor of her car. "Keep digging your grave." Papers fluttered to the concrete floor of the garage. Pristine legal documents trampled beneath Officer Brian Dugan's heavy boots. He continued his frantic, fruitless search of Naomi's vehicle, his frustration mounting with every passing second. He had expected to find something, anything, to justify his adrenaline-fueled rage. A weapon, illicit drugs, an open container of alcohol. Instead, he was staring at complex federal consent decrees and endless pages of bureaucratic litigation that he could barely comprehend. Dugan's thick fingers finally snatched up the leather wallet he had dumped onto the passenger seat. He flipped it open. The heavy brass shield of the Department of Justice caught the harsh glare of his flashlight, reflecting a cold, golden beam directly into his eyes. Beside the badge was Naomi's official government identification card, complete with her photograph, her security clearance level, and her title. Director, Special Litigation Section, Civil Rights Division. Officer Dether Fowler stepped closer, craning his neck to look over his partner's shoulder. The younger cop's face instantly drained of color. "Brian," Fowler whispered, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming dread. "Brian, look at the ID. That's a federal badge. She's DOJ. Dugan stared at the laminated card for a long, heavy moment. A rational man, a trained professional, would have realized the catastrophic error of his ways. A rational man would have immediately uncuffed the homeowner, apologized profusely, and prayed that his union representative was awake. But Dugan was not a rational man. He was a bully caught in a trap of his own making, fueled by a deeply ingrained prejudice that simply could not accept the reality in front of him. His ego demanded that he maintain dominance. "You can buy these on the internet for $50, Deetha," Dugan sneered, aggressively shoving the ID back into the wallet and tossing it onto the hood of the Audi. He turned back to Naomi, his face inches from hers. "You think you're smart? You think a fake badge is going to scare me off? Impersonating a federal officer is a felony, sweetheart. You just added 5 years to your sentence." Naomi did not flinch. She kept her breathing steady, her eyes locked onto Dugan's flushed, sweating face. "I strongly suggest you run the credential number through your dispatch system before you make another move," Naomi said evenly, her voice devoid of panic. "Because when the Federal Bureau of Investigation pulls the logs of this encounter, your willful refusal to verify a federal official's identity will establish malicious intent." "Shut up!" Dugan roared, spit flying from his lips. He grabbed her by the bicep, his grip brutal and punishing. "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it." He yanked her away from the Audi, half dragging her toward the open garage door. The metal cuffs bit violently into Naomi's wrists, scraping her skin raw, but she forced herself to walk with perfect, fluid balance. She deliberately placed one foot carefully in front of the other, her posture impeccably straight. She was silently establishing, on her own high-definition surveillance camera, that she was entirely sober, physically compliant, and in complete control of her motor functions. She was building her case, step by agonizing step. As they emerged from the garage and stepped onto the paved driveway, the commotion finally disturbed the wealthy, insulated silence of Sycamore Drive. The front door of the house directly across the street swung open. An older, distinguished man, wearing a heavy wool robe, stepped out onto his porch. It was Arthur Covington, a retired federal appellate judge who had lived in the neighborhood for 3 decades. "What in the world is going on out here?" Judge Covington called out, his authoritative voice carrying easily over the static of the police radios. He began walking down his driveway toward the flashing cruisers. "Get back inside your house, sir. This is an active police scene," Dugan barked, putting a hand on his holstered weapon. Covington ignored the command, marching right up to the edge of Naomi's property line. He squinted through the harsh strobe lights, his eyes settling on the handcuffed woman being manhandled by the furious officer. "Naomi?" Covington asked, genuine shock radiating from his face. "Naomi, is that you?" "Good evening, Arthur," Naomi replied calmly, though her breathing was strained. "I am being unlawfully detained. Officer Dugan here claims I ran a stop sign and am resisting arrest. Sir, I am giving you one final warning to step back, or you will be arrested for interfering with a police investigation," Dugan shouted, pointing a thick finger at the older man. Judge Covington drew himself up to his full height. He looked at Dugan, then at the trembling Fowler, and finally at Naomi's secured wrists. Decades of judicial experience allowed him to read the scene perfectly. He saw a rogue cop out of his depth, and he saw a brilliant legal mind quietly allowing her captor to hang himself. "Officer," Covington said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, patronizing register. "My name is Arthur Covington. I served 22 years on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. The woman you are currently brutalizing is one of the most senior civil rights attorneys in the federal government. I strongly advise you to remove those handcuffs." Fowler took a panicked step backward, looking as though he might physically be sick. Brian, we need to stop. We need to call the sergeant." "I don't care if she's the Queen of England," Dugan yelled, completely unhinged by the public challenge to his authority. He shoved Naomi roughly toward the back of his cruiser. "She broke the law, she eluded a traffic stop, and she is going to jail. Watch your back, old man." Dugan practically threw Naomi into the plastic-lined back seat of the Ford Explorer, slamming the heavy door shut behind her with a deafening crash. He stomped around to the driver's side, ignoring Fowler's desperate, pleading whispers. The cruiser's engine roared to life, and Dugan threw it into reverse, peeling out of the driveway and leaving a pair of black tire marks on Naomi's pristine concrete. Sitting in the cramped, suffocating darkness of the police cruiser, her hands throbbing with pain, Naomi leaned her head back against the hard plastic partition. Through the metal mesh, she could see Dugan gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his chest heaving with misplaced adrenaline. She wasn't scared anymore. The fear had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Dugan had crossed the Rubicon. He had breached her home, assaulted her, ignored a federal mandate, and publicly humiliated her. He thought he was taking her to a cage. He didn't realize he was driving himself straight into a federal penitentiary. The Montgomery County Police District 2 station was a cinder-block fortress, bathed in the unforgiving glare of fluorescent tubes. It smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the sour sweat of desperation. At 2:30 in the morning, the bullpen was a sluggish landscape of exhausted officers typing reports and booking petty offenders. That sluggishness vanished the moment Officer Brian Dugan marched Naomi Carmichael through the heavy double doors of the holding area. Dugan kept a firm, punishing grip on Naomi's bicep, parading her past the holding cells like a trophy hunter, displaying a prized kill. Naomi walked with her head held high, her expression an impenetrable mask of absolute composure. She ignored the stares of the uniformed officers and the muttered comments from the holding tank. She was mentally cataloguing everything: the layout of the room, the badge numbers of the officers present, the exact time on the large digital clock mounted above the desk. "Got a live one for you, Tommy," Dugan announced loudly as he approached the high booking desk. He practically shoved Naomi toward the counter. Desk Sergeant Thomas Riley, a 20-year veteran with a graying mustache and deeply lined eyes, looked up from his monitor. He took one look at Naomi, her tailored designer blazer, her expensive blouse, her complete lack of intoxication or erratic behavior, and frowned. "What's the charge, Brian?" Riley asked, his tone flat, exhausted by Dugan's constant need for theatrics. "Eluding a police officer, resisting arrest, failure to obey a lawful order, and suspicion of DUI. Dugan rattled off proudly, tossing Naomi's purse and the leather wallet onto the high counter. Refused a breathalyzer on the scene. Claimed she was some big-shot federal lawyer. Had a fake DOJ badge in her wallet. Riley's heavy brow furrowed. He reached out and picked up the leather wallet, opening it to reveal the gold shield and the identification card. Riley had processed thousands of arrests in his career. He had seen every fake ID a college student could print. He ran his thumb over the raised holographic seal of the Department of Justice on the plastic card. He felt the weight of the brass badge. It wasn't fake. It was absolutely, unequivocally real. Sergeant Riley's stomach plummeted into his boots. He looked up from the ID, his eyes locking onto Naomi's. "Mum," Riley said, his voice suddenly very quiet, very respectful. "Is this your identification?" "It is, Sergeant," Naomi replied, her voice steady and echoing clearly in the sudden silence of the booking area. "I am Naomi Carmichael, Director of the Special Litigation Section, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. I was assaulted and unlawfully arrested inside my own garage by Officer Dugan." Dugan let out a loud, mocking snort. "Don't listen to her, Tommy. She's full of it. I want her processed, fingerprinted, and thrown in holding. I'm going to go right up the arrest report." "Brian, shut up!" Riley snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. The sudden venom in the older sergeant's tone made Dugan freeze. Riley didn't take his eyes off Naomi. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "My wrists are losing circulation, Sergeant, and my left shoulder was injured when your officer slammed me against the hood of my vehicle," Naomi stated factually. "Get those cuffs off her." "Right now," Riley ordered, pointing a trembling finger at Dugan. "Tommy, you can't be serious. She's—" "I said, take the damn cuffs off her, Dugan! Now!" Riley roared, standing up from his desk. The entire bullpen fell dead silent. Officers stopped typing. Telephones rang unanswered. Every eye in the room was locked onto the booking desk. Fowler, who had been hovering nervously near the doorway, practically sprinted forward, fumbling for his cuff keys. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the keys twice before finally managing to unlock the metal bracelets. Naomi brought her arms forward, wincing slightly as blood rushed back into her deeply bruised, deeply grooved wrists. She rubbed them slowly, not breaking eye contact with Sergeant Riley. "Ma'am, you have the right to a phone call," Riley said, his face pale. "You can use the phone on my desk." "Thank you, Sergeant," Naomi said. She reached across the counter and picked up the receiver. She didn't dial a local defense attorney. She didn't dial a bail bondsman. She dialed a number she knew by heart, a direct encrypted line to the Deputy Assistant Attorney General in Washington, D.C. It rang twice. "Hughes," a groggy, deep voice answered. "Simon, it's Naomi." The grogginess instantly vanished from the line. "Naomi, it's almost 3 a.m. Is everything all right?" "I am currently standing at the booking desk of the Montgomery County Police District 2 precinct," Naomi said, her voice carrying easily across the dead quiet room. Every police officer in the vicinity was hanging on her every word. "I have been unlawfully detained, physically assaulted, and falsely charged by an officer, Brian Dugan. My vehicle, containing the confidential Baltimore consent decree files, was illegally searched without a warrant." A heavy, terrifying silence hummed on the other end of the line. When Simon Hughes spoke again, his voice was pure ice. "Are you secured?" "I am currently uncuffed, standing at the booking desk," Naomi replied. "Do not say another word to anyone," Hughes commanded. "I am waking up the special agent in charge at the FBI Washington field office immediately. I am dispatching a federal transport unit to your location. Give the phone to the highest-ranking officer in that building." "Hold, please," Naomi said politely. She held the receiver out toward Sergeant Riley. "My Deputy Assistant Attorney General would like a word with your watch commander." Sergeant Riley looked at the phone as if it were a live hand grenade. He slowly picked it up and brought it to his ear. "This is Desk Sergeant Riley." He listened for about 10 seconds. All the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." "I understand completely. He is coming down right now." Riley hung up the phone and looked at Dugan, who was standing a few feet away, finally beginning to look uncertain. The smug, arrogant grin had melted off Dugan's face, replaced by the dawning horror of a man realizing he had just stepped off a cliff in the dark. "Brian," Sergeant Riley said, his voice shaking, "give me your gun and your badge." "What?" "Tommy, you can't do this! She ran a stop sign!" Dugan protested, his voice pitching up in panic. "Give me your weapon, Brian," Riley repeated, stepping out from behind the desk. "Captain Harris is coming down here right now. The FBI is 20 minutes away. You are being stripped of your police powers, effective immediately." Dugan looked wildly around the room, looking for support from his fellow officers, but the blue wall of silence had crumbled. No one met his gaze. They were all looking down at their shoes, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout that was about to vaporize Brian Dugan's life. Naomi stood quietly by the desk, rubbing her bruised wrists. She watched Dugan unbuckle his gun belt with trembling hands, the heavy metal clattering onto the counter. He had taken her power in the darkness of her garage, relying on lies and brute force. Now, in the harsh light of the precinct, the full weight of the federal government was bearing down on him, and he was shrinking before her very eyes. Captain William Harris was a man who had spent 30 years carefully navigating the politics of local law enforcement, aiming for a quiet, pension-padded retirement. That dream evaporated the moment he stepped off the precinct elevator at 3:15 in the morning, hastily buttoning a wrinkled uniform shirt over his undershirt. The bullpen, usually a chorus of ringing phones and clacking keyboards at this hour, was as silent as a mausoleum. Every officer stood rigidly at their desks, eyes darting between the captain and the impeccably dressed black woman sitting with perfect posture on a hard wooden bench near the booking desk. Harris bypassed his officers and walked straight to Sergeant Riley, his face slick with a nervous sweat. Riley leaned in, whispering the catastrophic details of the last 45 minutes. With every word, Harris's complexion paled. By the time Riley finished, the captain looked as though he might physically collapse. Harris approached Naomi, forcing a strained, diplomatic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Carmichael, I am Captain Harris, the watch commander. I want to personally apologize for any miscommunication or distress that occurred tonight. If you'll just step into my office, we can get this all straightened out, have some coffee, and get you on your way home." "Captain Harris," Naomi replied, her voice echoing off the cinder-block walls, devoid of any warmth. "I am not here to have coffee. I am not here to straighten things out. I am currently the victim of a false arrest, an aggravated battery, and a warrantless search of highly classified federal property. I am waiting for my colleagues from the Bureau. Until they arrive, I have nothing further to say to anyone in this department." Harris swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his thick throat. "Ma'am, please. Officer Dugan has been disarmed. We are initiating an internal affairs investigation immediately. Let's not escalate this beyond what is necessary." "The escalation," Naomi stated coldly, "occurred the moment your officer decided my driveway was his personal jurisdiction and my civil rights were optional. Before Harris could attempt another desperate plea for damage control, the heavy glass double doors of the precinct lobby were violently thrown open. The local officers flinched as half a dozen figures strode into the room, moving with the terrifying, synchronized purpose of a federal tactical unit. They weren't wearing local blues. They wore tailored dark suits and navy windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI. At their center was Special Agent in Charge Robert Mitchell, a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and eyes that possessed all the warmth of a frozen lake. Mitchell bypassed the front desk entirely, marching past a stunned local deputy. He locked eyes with Naomi, giving her a sharp, respectful nod before turning his devastating gaze onto Captain Harris. "Captain William Harris?" Mitchell asked, flashing a gold badge that commanded immediate, absolute submission. "Special Agent Mitchell, Washington Field Office. The Department of Justice is assuming total jurisdictional control of this precinct and this investigation, effective this exact second." "Agent Mitchell, we have the situation under control," Harris stammered, stepping forward. "The offending officer has been stripped of his—" "You have nothing under control," Mitchell interrupted, his voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. He pointed to Naomi's leather briefcase and purse, still sitting on the booking counter. "Is that the federal property that was illegally searched?" "Yes, Agent Mitchell," Naomi confirmed, standing up. "Secure the perimeter. Nobody enters, nobody leaves without my authorization," Mitchell barked to his agents. 2 heavily armed federal agents immediately posted themselves at the exit doors. 2 more moved behind the booking desk, physically displacing Sergeant Riley and taking control of the computer terminals. "Captain," Mitchell continued, stepping directly into Harris's personal space, "where is the officer who put his hands on the director of the Special Litigation Section?" Harris pointed a shaky finger toward the hallway leading to the interrogation rooms. "Room 3. He's in with his union rep." "Not anymore, he isn't," Mitchell said. He turned to Naomi, his tone softening only a fraction. "Director Carmichael, if you would accompany me to the captain's office, we need to establish the exact timeline of civil rights violations before I take this local cowboy into federal custody." Naomi nodded, following Mitchell into the glass-walled office, leaving a completely paralyzed local police force in her wake. Down the hall, inside interrogation room 3, Brian Dugan was pacing like a caged animal. His union representative, a tired man named Gregson, sat at the metal table, rubbing his temples. "You're panicking over nothing, Greg," Dugan spat, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "So she's a Fed. Big deal. She still ran a stop sign. She still evaded a traffic stop. She still resisted arrest. My body cam malfunctioned, so it's my word against hers. And I'm a decorated officer. The brass will protect me. They always do. We just say she was erratic and aggressive, and I used standard mechanical compliance." "Brian, you dragged a DOJ director out of her car in her own garage." Gregson sighed, looking up. "The FBI is in the lobby. You don't understand the gravity." The door to the interrogation room didn't open. It was shoved inward with enough force to dent the drywall. Special Agent Mitchell stepped into the small room, casting a massive, imposing shadow over the metal table. "Union representation is dismissed," Mitchell ordered, staring directly at Gregson. "I have a right to be here to represent my—" Gregson started. "This is no longer an internal departmental inquiry," Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "This is a federal criminal investigation into a felony violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 242. If you do not vacate this room, I will have you arrested for obstructing a federal agent. Out." Gregson didn't hesitate. He packed his notepad and scurried out the door, abandoning Dugan without a second glance. Dugan stood alone, suddenly feeling very small in the windowless room. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon the bullish authority he had wielded so freely just an hour ago. "You Feds think you can just march in here," Dugan sneered, though his voice lacked its usual venom. "I was doing my job. She ran a stop sign at Bradley and Wisconsin. She refused to pull over. When I approached her in the garage, she was combative. I felt my safety was threatened. There's no body cam footage, so you can't prove a damn thing. It's my word against hers, and a local judge will back the badge every time." Mitchell didn't yell. He didn't slam his hands on the table. He simply pulled a sleek, silver smartphone from his inside jacket pocket, unlocked it, and slid it across the metal table toward Dugan. "You're right about one thing, Brian," Mitchell said quietly. "Your body cam mysteriously malfunctioned right before you breached her property line. A remarkable coincidence. But you made a critical, career-ending error. You assumed the darkness was your friend." Dugan looked down at the phone. The screen was paused on a high-definition video frame. It was a wide-angle, crystal-clear, full-color shot of Naomi's garage, illuminated by the blinding strobe lights of Dugan's cruiser. The angle was from above, capturing the entire driveway, the vehicles, and every single movement. "Press play," Mitchell commanded softly. With a trembling finger, Dugan tapped the screen. The audio kicked in instantly. Pristine, directional audio that completely eliminated the background noise of the street. Dugan heard his own voice, echoing with terrifying clarity. "I didn't ask for lip. I asked for compliance." He watched in 4K resolution As Naomi explicitly explained, she was on private property. He watched as he yanked the door open. He watched himself grab her arm, rip her from the driver's seat, and violently slam her against the hood of the Audi. He watched as he mocked her federal badge. He watched himself illegally rip open the leather briefcase, tossing confidential federal documents onto the floor like garbage. Every lie he had just told his union rep, every lie he had told the booking sergeant, was systematically dismantled by the unblinking, objective truth of the Lorex pan-tilt-zoom, hard-wired security camera. Dugan's breath caught in his throat. His chest tightened, as if bound by iron bands. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He stared at the looping video, the realization of his absolute, inescapable doom washing over him like a tidal wave. Director Carmichael's husband is a senior cybersecurity architect for the Department of Defense, Mitchell explained casually, leaning against the doorframe. That camera doesn't record to a local drive you can conveniently lose. It streams directly to an encrypted AWS cloud server, time-stamped, geolocated, and already secured as Exhibit A in your federal indictment. Dugan tried to speak, but only a pathetic, choked gasp escaped his lips. His career wasn't just over. His life as a free man had just evaporated. "Officer Brian Dugan," Mitchell said, pulling a pair of heavy, federal-issue handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for the deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated battery, and evidence tampering. Put your hands behind your back." The fallout was biblical. The arrest of Officer Brian Dugan did not remain a quiet, internal matter, swept under the rug by police unions and sympathetic local judges. Naomi Carmichael made absolutely sure of that. As a woman who had dedicated her life to dismantling systemic corruption, she refused to allow her own traumatizing experience to become just another statistical anomaly. By sunrise, the Department of Justice had officially launched a massive, comprehensive pattern or practice investigation into the Montgomery County Police Department. The video from Naomi's garage was not leaked to the press. It was played in open federal court during Dugan's arraignment, entirely bypassing local grand jury politics. The pristine audio of Dugan fabricating a traffic stop, combined with his violent physical assault on a fully compliant citizen, left his high-priced union defense attorneys with absolutely no room to maneuver. Officer Detha Fowler, terrified of federal prison, flipped immediately. Within 48 hours, he was sitting in a windowless room at the FBI field office, trading his badge and his career for immunity. He provided sworn testimony, detailing a long history of Dugan's racially motivated traffic stops, the systematic disabling of body cameras, and the precinct's culture of covering up excessive force. Fowler's confession acted as the key that unlocked a Pandora's box of departmental rot. Captain William Harris was forced into an early, disgraced retirement, cited for severe administrative negligence and failure to supervise. The blue wall of silence, which had protected the precinct for decades, crumbled entirely under the crushing weight of federal subpoenas and FBI forensic audits. For Brian Dugan, there was no leniency, no quiet resignation, and no relocation to another department in a different state. The federal judge, a strict constitutionalist appointed decades prior, viewed Dugan's actions as an egregious betrayal of the public trust. Faced with insurmountable digital evidence and the testimony of his own partner, Dugan pleaded guilty to the federal civil rights charges. He was stripped of his pension, permanently banned from holding any position in law enforcement, and sentenced to 48 months in a federal penitentiary. 6 months after the incident, the crisp autumn air had finally driven the brutal humidity out of the Washington, D.C. basin. Naomi Carmichael pulled her Audi e-tron off the busy expanse of Connecticut Avenue, the familiar quiet of Chevy Chase welcoming her home. The bruising on her wrists had long since faded. The physical soreness in her shoulder was completely gone. But the psychological scars, the sudden spike in her heart rate whenever a police cruiser pulled in behind her in traffic, the hypervigilance that now accompanied her evening commutes, remained. It was a burden she now shared intimately with the thousands of victims her division represented every year. The abstract concept of systemic injustice had manifested in her own driveway, proving that no amount of education, wealth, or federal authority could provide absolute immunity from the color of her skin. She turned onto Sycamore Drive. The street was quiet, the massive colonial homes glowing warmly against the twilight. She hit the button on her sun visor. The heavy oak-paneled door of her garage began to ascend, spilling light onto the concrete. She pulled in, parking perfectly beside David's car. She put the vehicle in park, turned off the ignition, and sat in the quiet silence of the garage. Naomi looked up at the far right corner of the ceiling. The small, sleek, black dome of the Lorex camera rested silently in the shadows, its tiny red indicator light blinking steadily. The unblinking eye that had saved her career, her liberty, and perhaps her life. She took a deep, centering breath, letting the tension of the day release from her shoulders. She grabbed her purse and her heavy leather briefcase, stuffed once again with fresh federal consent decrees aimed at reforming another broken department in another broken city. She stepped out of the car, hitting the button on the wall to close the garage door. As the heavy wooden barrier descended, sealing her sanctuary from the darkness outside, Naomi Carmichael stood tall. The system had tried to break her in the dark, but she was the architect of the light, and tomorrow she had work to do. Thank you so much for watching this intense, true-to-life story of power, corruption, and absolute justice. If you were on the edge of your seat watching Naomi turn the tables on a corrupt system, make sure you smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more gripping, high-stakes narratives. Don't forget to share this video with your friends to spread awareness about the importance of knowing your rights. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling story. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Naomi's situation? Let's discuss.